So dispensationalism, we believe in that doctrine, basically rightly dividing the word of truth. So in other words, you got to make sure that the verses you're reading, that you don't wrongly apply it to yourself. You got to make sure the right person, right time period. Now, how we know Christian doctrine, if you want to know which doctrine is right and wrong, what's our doctrine, you got to think about this, okay? Who do you think is the most clear? The most clear. If you want to find your doctrines, you want to go by the most clear evidence. So who's the most clear evidence of writing for Christian doctrine definitely? Who do you think's the best one? It would be Paul. So if you want to get Christian doctrine, don't run to the Old Testament, don't run to James, don't even run to what Jesus said in Matthew 19 and other stuff. You got to realize that their ministries were different. I showed you that the ministries of the apostles, Jesus, and then the Old Testament especially, they were at different time periods, different groups of people they were ministering to. But the Apostle Paul, his ministry, his time period, was definitely for Christians. So we will see right here what is Christian doctrine, and this is probably the most important video that will be helpful for you to know which one is proper, right, Christian doctrine. So let's look at Romans chapter 11. How many of you heard salvation by faith alone, not by works? We all believe in that. How many of you heard salvation by faith alone, but this faith alone, this grace alone is guaranteed, where you have to do these works, and if you remain a wicked Christian, you are not really saved. So you are not really saved by faith, really saved by grace. What are you talking about? So you're saying that works have to contribute to keep that grace going? This is one of the best verses to use. Look at Romans chapter 11, verse 6. The Bible says, "And if by grace, then is it no more of works. Otherwise, grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then is it no more grace. Otherwise, work is no more work." Do you know what that verse says? Salvation by grace is what? Salvation by grace. And works is what? Works. Can you put grace and works together? Yes or no? No. That verse is definitely clear. You can't put these two together. You know why? If you insist that this will have to be with this, you automatically cancel this out. That's what Paul said. Paul says you automatically cancel out salvation by grace if you put this guy in with that. And if you insist this guy is included in any way, you cancel this guy out. And if you insist in this, no matter what, you know what you automatically cancel out? What did Paul say? What do you automatically cancel out? This guy. Otherwise, you even get rid of the meaning of works. Didn't you know that? If you insist the works are included with salvation by grace, you know what you're doing? You're even getting rid of the meaning of works. Works and grace are totally distinct, different issues. A great verse, salvation by faith alone, not by works. Let's also look at the book of Galatians. The book of Galatians. We will look at Galatians chapter 1 and verse 11. Galatians chapter 1, and we will read verse 11. Notice that Paul's ministry, his training, now this is important to understand about Paul. When you read all the other writings right here of the apostles, who were they brought up under? Who were they raised up under for years? Jesus' ministry. And Jesus' ministry was what? Primarily Jewish. And he included a lot of tribulation theme. Paul was not brought up under this. Paul was a separate ministry. Look at Galatians chapter 1. He was trained by God himself for something different. Look at Galatians chapter 1, verse 11. "But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, So see that? He said he was not taught of this. So he was not like the apostles. He was not taught under these apostles. He was not taught under the believers that followed Jesus. He was taught after what? But by the revelation of Jesus Christ. Notice right here that he was taught personally by God, something different, something separate. He was taught something different, something separate. We're also going to look at how he described the gospel. Let's read verse 8. Verse 8 of Galatians 1. Verse 8. But though we or an angel of heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be what? Accursed. Paul said, the gospel that I preach to you, if something else is preached to you that contradicts, that's accursed. So you notice that Paul's preaching of the gospel, his preaching and teachings is going to be distinct. It's different. But let's also look at 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. That's why we call it Paul's gospel. He even said one time, do you know what he also said one time? He also even said one time, my gospel. So it shows right here that Paul's preaching of the gospel, that Paul's preaching teachings is very distinct and different. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you, which also ye have received, and wherein ye stand. So Paul's saying the gospel that I preached to you. Verse 2, by which also ye are saved. See that? So, your Christian salvation. Let's also look at several more passages. Look at Galatians chapter 2. Galatians chapter 2. Now, when we turn to Galatians 2, here's an interesting question. All right? Here's an interesting question. I want you to go to Galatians 2 and then also 2 Thessalonians 2. Galatians 2 and 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Here's something that's very interesting that also shows the distinction. Paul, what does he talk quite often about for Christians? He talked quite often about the rapture. As a matter of fact, when we talk about the Christian rapture, do you know the two most famous passages are for the Christian rapture? Are they the other apostles, or are they from this guy? 1 Corinthians 15, that's Paul. And as well as what? 1 Thessalonians 4, that's Paul. I know that they taught some of the stuff about the rapture, but why is it this guy is more plain and more clear about it, and this one's more abstract? And here's another thing. Why is it that Paul, concerning the tribulation, I know he talks about that, but why is the tribulation abstract with Paul?
That's good.
And then what is more clear about the tribulation? This guy. The apostles. Rapture, they do talk about it, but it's fuzzy, it's abstract. See, that shows there's a difference of ministries. There's absolutely no doubt difference of ministries. So here's something that's interesting about the Apostle Paul. Let's look at first Galatians chapter 2. So I read it to you in this room before, but the people online, this is going to be their first time because it's a separate video clip. So look at Galatians chapter 2. We will read verse 8 and 9. Notice the distinction of their ministries. For he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen. So Paul's going to non-Jews, and they, that's James, Cephas, John, apostles, Peter, unto who? The Jews. See, distinction. This is Jewish. This is Christian ministry. Let's also look at 2 Thessalonians 2. The clearest, the most clear verse that Paul will mention about the tribulation is 2 Thessalonians 2. That's the strongest you're going to get for the most clear passage about describing the events of the tribulation. And look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're going to read verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. And who? The Antichrist, man of sin, be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped. So he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So the Antichrist is ruling in the tribulation. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? So Paul, he talks about the events of the tribulation. And now ye know what withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. Antichrist. Verse 7, Antichrist. Verse 8, Antichrist. Verse 9, Antichrist. 10, 11, 12. All the Antichrist and tribulation. That's the most clear passage you're going to hear about the tribulation events from Paul. But let me ask you this question. In verses 3 through 10, did you notice how he was directing to other people, and he never said it was you or Christians? He said they, other people, but not you. Why? Because Paul, he's fuzzy, he's abstract about this tribulation, because he knows that Christians, this is really unnecessary for them. Because why? His ministry was to Christians, and what's more clear? What's more clear? Is it this guy or this guy's for Christians? What's more clear? This guy. Which time period is more clear? This guy or the Christian time period? What's more clear from Paul? Christian time period. Do you know why? Because he makes this distinction. Because this distinction is for Jews. Christians do not go through the tribulation. What's very clear for them is this guy, the rapture, and this time period. You see, there is absolutely no doubt when you read the writings of the apostles and Paul, there is something different. There is a distinction to understand. If you don't understand that, you will mess up in doctrine. This is from a historical perspective, as well as exactly looking at what the verse says. But not only that, look at the same passage where he talks about the tribulation. Verse 12, that they, not you, during the tribulation, all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. But, so you're not a part of this. We, Christians, do you see 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, about us, about you, tribulation event? Do you see that anywhere? No. You don't see that anywhere. He puts the tribulation event to they, to others. But to you and to us and we, he doesn't put tribulation event in there. Look at this. We are bound to give thanks always to God for you, brethren, beloved of the Lord, because God hath from the beginning chosen you as salvation through sanctification of the Spirit and belief of the truth, whereunto he called you by our gospel. So now Paul really says our gospel, to the obtaining of what? The glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. Notice Paul says that it's not for you. You're different from those people at the tribulation. Because you know why? We are called to glory. That's why. Look at the book of Colossians. Look at the book of Colossians. Oh, bummer. All right, I'll just post it online. That's it. Anyways, so what we're going to find out right here is that Paul, you know that his ministry is very, very different compared to other time periods, and it's not applicable to Jews. I'm going to post a verse later on, but in the verse you will find out that the Christians were not called to go through the tribulation. We are called to glory. God will call you up to glory one day. Amen. And the tribulation event is not for you. Salvation by works, faith and works is not for you. Jewish themes are not for you. All of us is what? We are a distinct, definite, separate ministry. And people who tell you otherwise will teach you heresy. So, if you're going to find Christian doctrine, here's a simple question to Christians out there. If you want to prove Christian doctrine, don't use fuzzy, abstract writings to prove Christian doctrine. Use something that's the most clear, the most definitive for Christian doctrine. So that's why our doctrine, our teaching, has more evidence than those people. Because ours is more clear. Theirs is more abstract.